us started because we have a nice group of people here at 9:30. You all came early today. That's awesome. I'm forewarned our speakers. Sometimes we start a little late because so I have on the they are not going to use the PowerPoint today as part of their presentation, but I put the PowerPoint up there because I wanted to remind you all that we are now on our fourth session of this summer series with Faith in the Issues of Our Time, kind of a reboot of our beloved issues class, and we're up today to talking about homelessness. We have some great speakers with us. Natalie Harris is going to start us off. She is the current executive director of the Coalition for the Homeless. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that organization. It's a nonprofit group that's committed to advocacy, education, and collaboration on the issue of homelessness. She's been there since April of 2010. Prior to that, she was the chief executive officer of Miami Valley Housing Opportunities, which is a nonprofit housing provider in Ohio. Prior to that, she was director of the Specialized Housing Resource Department at Kentucky Housing Corporation, which is the state agency that is the primary housing finance and funder of like tax credit housing and lots of other affordable housing. She's been a consultant to the U.S. Census Bureau. She's worked with the Urban Institute. She has a long-term background in the issues of homelessness and housing. And we are fortunate to have with her, presenting to us this morning, Bill Hollander, who is a member of our Metro Council. He was elected to represent District 9 in November of 2014 and ran unopposed, right, in your last round in November of 2018. Bill represents neighborhoods and cities here. I'm going to read these to you because there's the number of people he represents is phenomenal. He represents cities of Bellwood, he represents Brownsboro Village, Butchertown, Cherokee Gardens, Cherokee Woods, Clifton Heights, Crescent Hill, Greenleaves, Irish Hill, Lexington Road Preservation Area, Rich Lawn, Seneca Rock Creek, and a portion of St. Matthews. That may be half of you all or more out there. That's District 9. He currently serves in his capacity as a council person as chair of the Budget Committee, and he is also on council's government oversight group and audit and ethics committee, and he also works on public works committee. He has been the primary sponsor of several major pieces of legislation. An ordinance which changed the metro budgeting process, the public tree ordinance, and most appropriate for our time this morning, he is he's responsible for the homeless protection ordinance, and that's one of the reasons we wanted him here to talk with us. Prior to joining the council, he's been chair of Leadership Louisville, vice chair of the Library Foundation, on the board of the Fund for the Arts. He has twice been a Bingham Fellow, and until 2014, he was the managing partner of Wyatt, Terrett, and Combs, practicing intellectual property law for 30 years. And we've got some partners of his in our congregation as well, including Global Potts and others. So, with no further ado, I'm going to invite Natalie to start us off.
Thank you all very much for the opportunity and the interest, everybody coming out on a Sunday to listen to the issue of homelessness. It's encouraging to feel that there are people in the community who are concerned about this issue and interested in trying to figure out what we can do to address it. I think this is an interesting concept and something that we should continue because when I talk about homelessness, I try to remind people that homelessness is not the problem in itself. Homeless people, the one thing that they all have in common is poverty. There are lots of different roads that will lead you to homelessness, but in general, people become homeless because the systems that are here in our city and our state and our country have in some way failed, and those people have fallen through the cracks, and in addition to their poverty, have fallen through to the point where they can no longer afford housing. And so I try to remind people that really what we're talking about when we're trying to deal with homelessness is dealing with the systems that cause homelessness, which makes it even more difficult. We are talking about poverty, so we're talking about how much people are able to make versus what it costs for them to afford an apartment. Right now in Louisville, it costs, especially if you have children and you need a 2-bedroom apartment, it would cost you, or you would have to make somewhere between $17 and $18 an hour in order to be able to afford just an apartment, to have the basic food and clothing requirements. That doesn't really allow you to have the costs that you would need for transportation and childcare and medical emergencies and all those other things as well. So in general, you would really need to make more than $17 an hour to be able to afford that. Our minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour, which means even if you're working 2 of those jobs, you aren't able to maintain just the average apartment in our community. In addition to that, and I want to add too, to make sure people understand this, that in our homeless shelters across the city, now over half of the people who are in shelter actually have some form of employment, but are not able with that employment to maintain housing. We have a really high eviction rate in the city, which is another one of the issues. We have reached a point where because we have so many people who can't afford housing, we have a cycle of eviction. And it's good and bad that our eviction rate is twice the national average. People are always asking, why is the eviction rate here in Louisville twice that of San Francisco or LA or New York City? If you go to those cities now, you will see there are very few poor people who still live in those cities. The gentrification has pushed people. There are now people who work in San Francisco who drive 3 hours each way to get to work because it's unaffordable to live in the city. Our city is still affordable, but we still have a lot of poor people who live in our city, and so they are, and each time they lose housing, and when I say they, in general, the people who go through the eviction process in our city tend to be single moms with children who are trying to make it on their own and are going through this cycle of getting into a place, not being able to really afford it. At some point, they get behind on rent, and then they end up getting evicted from that place, which means the next place they move into is worse than the place before. And in that, they're trying to raise children, so they're trying to make sure their kids have what all the other kids have in school and just make ends meet. And so that tends to be the largest portion of who's homeless in our city. There are people who are homeless on average 3 months. But they live a very tenuous life because they're trying to make ends meet with an income that only allows them to pay the necessities. And when that finally catches up with them, or when a child has to go to the hospital and they have that bill, or when a car breaks down, they are behind and just cannot ever catch back up again. Those people tend to come into shelter, save up while they're there, figure out a plan to get back into housing, and it's more of a cycle of continuing to figure out how do I make ends meet every month than an issue of long-term homelessness. The other group, which is really about 10% of the homeless population, but is who you mostly see throughout the city, are our chronically homeless. And that group here in Louisville is homeless on average about 4 years. These are the folks that have mental health issues, have addiction issues. There is a lot of, in that world, because of the addiction issues, human trafficking that goes on, and so people get caught up in that. And so that's the group that we spend the most time on, the group that costs our community the most money. And while we're spending all that money dealing with the emergencies of that group, the systems that should be serving them through mental health services, addiction services, are not able to keep up with the need. And so instead we're dealing with them through the police and through a low barrier shelter and other services that are not services that are getting people back into being citizens that are providing back into our community. I do want to say that I think if you have been in this world or have volunteered at shelters or worked at a shelter, things are very different right now. And I was saying that I want to lead to the next one of your sessions because of the opioid crisis. It has really changed who that chronic population is. We see a lot more returns to homelessness than we used to. We manage the Homeless Management Information System database, which is the database of all the homeless people who come in for services or that we find out on the streets in outreach. And we see that there are two big changes. One is that people that you wouldn't have expected before are living on the streets. People who are come from very middle class, white families and neighborhoods who have gotten caught up in addiction, and they have gotten to the low point where they are now sleeping on the streets because the only thing they can focus on their life is dealing with this addiction. And then the fact that we have people who we can get into a permanent housing apartment, but who end back up on the streets because of that addiction. So this is a really big issue for our community. It costs us all money. It costs us all seeing people who would be tax-paying citizens not being able to contribute to our community. While we think that's somebody else who's paying the price, we're all paying the price and need to figure out how to deal with that issue and make sure that we have evidence-based recovery programs, because we want these people back the type of citizens that we need in our community. Just to give you some statistics, last year we had 6,986 people that we knew of that came in for services or that we went out to and found in camps or on the streets. It's not it's not one or the other. There are people who come into shelter some nights and then are on the streets other nights. The biggest majority of those people are singles, and there are we do have families, and we would have more families if we had more shelter. I will say there are two groups that we've been really successful in addressing here in Louisville. Homeless veterans, because we had a huge influx of resources in our community and across the country, we now have reached functional zero. We have about 19 new veterans who become homeless every month in the city, and we're able to house that many every month in the city. So it's not like we've solved it and there aren't new people who are becoming homeless, but we now have a system where we can shelter them immediately and house them as quickly as they become homeless. And that is because the VA put up vouchers to get people into housing, and they put up money to pay shelters to house veterans so they could get immediately off the streets. The second group that we've done really well with is we were able to acquire a grant from HUD, which is the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to address young adult homelessness. That group had really increased in numbers. It went from about 125 a year to about 600 18 to 24-year-olds who had become homeless in any given year. In addition to the young adults who are under 18 who are runaways who go to Safe Place. So over 1,000 young people in our city who are homeless every year. And that number has now been cut in half. By working together, bringing everybody together to figure out, okay, here's the next person on the list, how are we going to get them housed? And then figuring out how we were going to change our systems. We just announced 6 major grants that are going to go out to local communities. And so I really feel positively that within the next 2 years, as those programs ramp up, we can reach the same point with young adults that we have with veterans. Our next effort is going to be working with families, and this is an area we're not doing well in. We have a waiting list for shelter for families. So if a family calls and says, I have 2 kids, we're sleeping in our car, we have no place to stay tonight, we put their name on a list and tell them to call back every 2 days to figure out if they've gotten to the top of that list to get into shelter. And that's not the community we want. We want people to get to a safe place quickly because we know that they're more likely to be successful if we can get them out of that situation. And I think the last issue that I would bring up, and we were talking about earlier, is segregation. One of the things that has kind of kept our community where we have this group of poorer citizens is that we really have divided our city into two. And so we see less services, less resources going to half of the city, and the way that the allocations of funding go to your voucher when you get housing is that you get 40% of what the average rent is here in the city. And so if you look at most of the eastern part of the city, your average rental would be somewhere about $750 a month. But if you look at West Louisville, your average rent would be about $400 a month. And so a voucher here in Louisville is worth about $550 a month, which means that you can't use it in East Louisville, and you're going to go right back to West and South Louisville as a person who needs assistance with housing. So we continue to segregate people and to keep our poor in one part of the city, but that's not where we're putting jobs. That's not where we're putting transportation. That's not where we're putting the resources that are going to help people get back on their feet and help us as a city. I could go on and on with other issues, but I want to give time for people to be able to ask questions. Again, I like this idea of including our government with talking about the issue of homelessness, because we are talking about improving systems. And I'm excited to say that my council member, Bill Hollander, has been really strong in looking at those issues and trying to improve them in our city. So I'm happy to have him speak as well.
So like Natalie, I want to thank you for your interest in the subject and for having us. We need all the help we can get on this subject. We need lots of people involved in advocating. We need lots of people involved in contributing. This is a very, very difficult subject. I'll just say a little bit about my interest in the whole subject of homelessness and housing. I said earlier to the person who introduced me, we were talking about the neighborhoods that I represent. I will never forget one of the early days when I was knocking on doors in 2014. And I knocked on a door in Clifton Heights, a very challenged neighborhood that I represent. And a man thought that I could do something for him. I couldn't, of course. I wasn't in office. I don't know that I could do much for him now that I am in office. But he invited me into his house to tell me about the horrible living conditions that he had. He showed me the paint peeling in his kitchen. He showed me the whole parade of horrors in his house, and that he couldn't get anything done. And his landlord paid no attention to him. And I tried to hook him up to legal aid eventually, but I left there more interested in the subject than I'd ever been. That afternoon, I campaigned in Cherokee Gardens, and we have different conditions across the community. It's always seemed to me that housing is just so important. If you want people to better educate themselves, to have better health outcomes, to address their problems like addiction, it is very difficult to do that if you don't have a stable, safe place to live. And so I got very interested in housing issues when I got there. I recognized my former colleague, Councilman Hollander here. The Metro Council, way before I was there, had passed an ordinance creating an affordable housing trust fund in the city, which was terrific, and it called for $10 million annually. This was a number that was thrown out. It wasn't thrown out. It was adopted by the council after a study of bankers and real estate people and people throughout the community as what we needed annually to put to affordable housing in the community. It was a terrific ordinance. It was really never funded. So the ordinance actually said, we create this board and they ought to go figure out a way to find the funding. And they had some recommendations, none of which ever got passed. And the recommendations included increased taxes. Actually, a small increase in the insurance premium tax, but that never got support on the Metro Council. In 2015, we did begin to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We have put into affordable housing in the last 4 years $45 million, not all to the trust fund, some to a new program called Local Cares, which the administration created. And I'm happy to say that if the budget that we approved at the Budget Committee passes on Tuesday night, we will put $5 million more. That's half as much as we did last year, clearly a reduction in that sort of environment that we're in. But I do think we're developing on council a view that housing is important and that we do need to fund affordable housing. I know we're talking about homelessness, so you may wonder why I'm talking about affordable housing. But I think one of the things that everybody agrees on is that the only permanent solution to homelessness is housing. So we, what we need to do is to continue to work on housing, affordable housing in the community. Natalie mentioned evictions. They are actually twice the national average in Louisville. There are 14 evictions every day of the year in Louisville Metro. Some of my colleagues have said to me, we just need to get all these people that are homeless off the street and then we'll solve this problem. And of course that doesn't solve the problem because there are new homeless people every day. We don't think of that, I think, regularly. I think there is a perception, and certainly we have chronically homeless people, and they are the most visible people in the community in terms of our homeless population. But, I think that we don't always think that there are new homeless every day. And until we deal, and unless we continue to deal with the affordable housing issue, we will never find the permanent solution to homelessness, which of course is housing. A couple of things that we have done on council and a few things that we've not done that I think are very important moving forward. The homeless protection ordinance, which was mentioned, was really designed so that as we clear a homeless encampment on public property, there would be a period of time at least where folks would have noticed that they were going to be evicted, if you will, from that encampment, so that to the extent we could, we would provide opportunities for them to find housing, to find other kind of support, and so that they could move their belongings and not just have them taken away. That ordinance really came about because of a really unfortunate incident where that did not happen. And everyone's belongings were taken without really much notice at all, in fact, no notice. That was unusual in the situation, in the community, even at that time. But a big majority of the council thought that was something that should never happen again. One thing we were not able to do in that ordinance, when we started looking at the issue, we looked around at what other communities had done. And in Indianapolis, they have a similar ordinance. But it actually goes one step further, and it's a really important step. The step was that you could not evict someone from a homeless encampment on public property unless you offered them a shelter to go to. We can't do that in this community because we don't have enough shelter beds. If all of the homeless people, and there's a great report which the city just funded, it's on our website, I'm sure on the coalition's website too, it's called Solving Street Homelessness in Louisville, Kentucky. And it makes the point that if all of the homeless people experiencing homelessness on our streets suddenly said they want shelter, we would not be able to do that. 67% maybe that we could actually put into a shelter bed if they said that. The other 33%, there's no place for them to go. So that's not something we could do in Louisville. They did it in Indianapolis, but we were not able to write that into our ordinance because we just don't have the shelter beds. You know, I've been somewhat outspoken about the movement of homeless encampments. And I want to be clear about this because I understand that a homeless encampment in someone's neighborhood, clearly on someone's sidewalk, is an issue that the people who live near there want to have dealt with. I understand that. I completely understand that Jefferson Street, which I hope all of you saw, I think it's one of the things that changed the conversation in this community. I completely understand that you can't have an encampment that completely blocks a public sidewalk that goes on forever. And there were other activities at that site which were clearly something that you know, people were preying on the folks who were in that encampment. On the other hand, I think it's important that people understand when that kind of encampment that's you're driving by every day disappears, and it disappears because we're saying it's not safe there. We have not provided a safe place for the people experiencing homelessness who are there to go to. We have just moved it to another location, which likely, at least for a while, is going to be a location that you may not see every day when you drive down the street. But it's not a solution, and no one should think it's a solution. So, you know, I think it's an interesting development in the community that as encampments became more visible to the public, there's been more focus on the issue. That's a good thing. Focus on the issue is a good thing, and I'm glad maybe that's one of the reasons we're here today. And it's certainly one of the reasons that we've had discussion in the community. And importantly, and moving to my next topic, it's one of the reasons that Metro Council has begun putting money into services. So last year in December, when the Jefferson Street encampment was there, the council chose to put $500,000, a little more than that, of surplus money from last year's budget into homeless services. So those have gone for a variety of things. It has helped to operate the low barrier shelter at Wayside, and we can talk about that in a minute. We clearly know that that needs to be improved. We clearly know, and the report makes very clear, that we need to have more low barrier shelters and smaller low barrier shelters, and very importantly, low barrier shelters that serve different populations. But that costs money too. We need people who are willing to have their facilities be that kind of low barrier shelter, but we also need to provide support for the services that are offered there. And for things like security, which are very important as we move forward. The council, again, the budget that passes has passed the budget committee, and it's going to be voted on by the full council on Tuesday, passes, we will put $1 million into homeless services in the fiscal year that starts July 1st. To continue, I hope in an improved way, some of the services that we're offering. And that's help for low barrier shelters. Importantly, it's outreach workers who are working for Up for Lowell, which is a new and very great women's day shelter in downtown, and St. John Center, which are sending people into camps to offer services. We know, the report says that we know that in the last 6 months have saved lives. So we think that needs to continue. There's an issue of storage. You know, if you're homeless and you want to get a job, as Natalie said, we have a lot of people experiencing homelessness who are working. And we have even more who would like to work, but it's very difficult to get a job if you're going for your interview with all of your belongings on your back or in a bag. And so this is a way to store those belongings while you do that kind of thing. That's operating now at First Link Market. It's going to be moving. We hope to continue that with some of the money. We hope to have other initiatives as we move forward. Finally, just, and I know that you will have questions, I'm sure you will, for both of us. I think some bigger issues that we need to think about in the community really involve housing and zoning and where we locate affordable housing. I've said that we have put $45 million into affordable housing in the last 4 years. We continue continue to see across the community, when an affordable housing development is proposed, objections from neighbors that it's in their neighborhood. And we live in a highly segregated community. We know that there are people who can benefit from and need affordable housing, whose jobs or families live in areas where we currently can't build affordable housing because of zoning restrictions. And we need to move to an attitude in this community of, yes, in my backyard, YIMBY, if you will, and not no in my backyard, NIMBY. And so that is something that we need to continue to talk about as a community. I think it's extremely important. We need to be more open to multifamily developments in single-family residentially zoned districts. That is a big part of the segregation in the community. And I noticed that Kathy Hinko is speaking. I really urge you to attend that. Kathy is also a constituent of mine and a great resource in the community, and certainly we'll talk about those kind of fair housing issues. But fair housing and affordable housing are really linked in the sense of where we can locate multifamily and affordable housing in the community. So just some thoughts about going forward. This is a difficult issue, and no one can tell you that we have the solution or that $1 million, if we approve that this year, is going to solve the problem. I can tell you, I'll just close with this. I know where a lot of people from Jefferson Street moved to. And I know that when they moved to the camp called CSX, which unfortunately got publicized, they were then moved from that camp by CSX. I also know where a lot of those people have moved to, and a lot of them are in my district. And I know that there will be pressure at some point about moving them again. And that is not a solution to our problem. We need to continue to work with this, and it will take, I have to tell you, it will take everyone's contributions. It will take your tax dollars. That's what we're going to spend, I hope, on Tuesday night. It will also take your private contributions and philanthropy and people opening up their doors. And it's a problem that we need to continue to work in the community. So thank you. I know Natalie would be, and I would certainly be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I also didn't add that there are materials that I left in the back, including the stats from last year on homeless people, and a publication that we're moving from doing, because that's the problem with a publication. As soon as it's printed, it's out of date. But the reason we continue to print street tips is a lot of people want to be able to not hand out money to people who ask on the streets, but to give them resources. And so that booklet gives you all the resources for homeless people in the city. I also hope people know about Louis Connect. It's a phone app that people can use to find all the free resources, including shelter and feeding and all of that, that Family Scholar House does. And so anyone can get on their phone and look at what those resources are and help somebody find out how to get them.
And I really would, this is some more serious reading, but if you're really interested in the subject, I really would encourage you to look up the report. It was recently done by the University of Louisville. Your tax dollars pay for it. It's much more than just a narrow look at street homelessness. It's really a look at the whole issue of housing, and it's a terrific report. It's just published in the last 3 weeks, I think. Somebody has a question, sure, or a comment.
Where do we get the report?
It's online at the city website. I can't tell you. It's probably easier to find it from Natalie's website.
Yeah, if you just go to louhomeless.org. Right now, we actually have a banner that comes across telling about it at the top of the page, and you can just click on that. Or if you go to at the top and you click resources, publications, and it's there as well.
It's called Solving Street Homelessness in Louisville, Kentucky.
Thank you.
And if it looks too daunting, and it is 80 pages, you could flip to the back and there's some recommendations in the back.
And there's somebody else over here.
I teach, and I have a number of students who are homeless. They work, they go to school, and they can't afford tuition and a place to live. Some of them can't afford food either. Is there anything for them?
Well, I'm really excited about, and it sounds like you're talking about an older age group of young people.
I'm talking about college students.
Yes,
Yeah, in their 20s.
and so we're really excited about, we just allocated $3.4 million from HUD to 6 different agencies who will be starting new programs for homeless young adults in our city. The ones that I'm most excited about are Home of the Innocents and St. Vincent de Paul will be opening 24 apartment-like shelter units or transitional housing units on the St. Vincent de Paul campus for that age group. And they will immediately get a voucher to move into an apartment for up to 2 years after that to help them get on their feet in those situations. We also funded housing vouchers for people who are in long-term training programs. So the Youth Build program, the Reimage program in the city, and other Kentuckiana Works programs where you will end up with a job at the end of that program. A lot of people fall out of those programs because their housing is so precarious, but now they'll have stable housing while they're trying to get through those programs. And then we funded an outreach program at YMCA Safe Place where they'll be going out in the streets finding young adults. Because of a U of L study, we know that about 40% of the young adults in our city who are homeless end up getting caught up in trafficking. And so the quicker we can get them, off the streets and into shelter or someplace safe, the better. And then there's just a lot of case management and services working with young people to help them find resources in the community as well.
Do you have something that they can call?
Yes, so the best place to call is the YMCA Safe Place hotline, and I will get that to you.
Students who are in their 20s.
Yes, it used to be just for people who are under 18, and now with this funding, they will serve people up to 24 on that hotline.
This temporary shelter that seems to be so, that is obviously so important. What kind of thing, what's a good example of temporary shelter? Is it an old warehouse repaired to make available beds and bags?
Well, I don't, you'll get different opinions about how comfortable shelter should be, so that people want to move on and get their lives back together. I find that when I'm more comfortable, I'm more able to work on my issues. And so one great example I would give is Volunteers of America has probably the best shelter capacity in our city. It's tight, you have a really small space, but it's pleasant and bright, and you have your meals and you can stay there.
That's
Well, I will say people have, because the housing issue is such a big issue and it's so expensive, we have really in this city focused on that. Like, how do we get more money into housing? Because that's the ultimate answer. We don't want people in shelter. But we are so far behind on housing that now we're talking about, okay, we're going to have to open new shelters because we're not getting this problem solved fast enough. And we did, when the low barrier shelter opened, at one point it served 160 people. So we all wondered, if we open this, will people come? But it turns out, yes, people will come. And they now are limiting it to 100, so it means those 60 people are back somewhere on the streets.
So, everybody may not know what we're talking about in on the street. I mean, many people have partners, and so if you operate a shelter and it's solely for men, solely for women, somebody's going to have to decide, okay, if we go inside, we're going to have to separate. And you probably want to separate from your partner, and many people on the street don't either. So the idea of a low barrier shelter is to remove those barriers and say, come in. You can't break the law in here. We're not going to let you use in the building. Obviously, you can't hurt other people, but we're lowering those barriers so that you can come in. What we saw was, as Natalie said, in the coldest months of the year, well over 100 people came in. Now, what we had at Wayside was a situation where all those people were sort of put in one room. And so I think what we all know is that what we really ought to have is situations where different populations are in different rooms, which means different shelters. And that's expensive. We hope to move toward that with some of the money that we're appropriating as a city, but we can't build these. We don't have enough money to build new shelters, so we need help in terms of who's going to open their doors to that sort of thing. But that's what we're talking about in terms of low barrier.
And services, I mean, right now at the low barrier shelter, on average for a shelter that serves 100 people, if you look at other cities, they would spend about $1 million a year just on operations, not on building the facility, not on renting the facility, just operating that facility for 100 people for a year with food and sheets and blankets and the staff that need to be there to help people get from there to a more stable situation. And really what we have is a large warehouse where people are safe and inside, and we have literally saved the lives of people who would have died on the streets. But we're not helping them get to the next stage because we don't have the money to pay for the staff there.
I want to say one other thing that's a myth, I think, that I hear a lot in the community. There are people in the community who think that we have as many people as we have experiencing homelessness because we offer so many services that we're a magnet and we attract people who are experiencing homelessness from around the country. And I think all the data indicates that the vast majority of people who are experiencing homelessness in the community became homeless, lost their housing within this geographic area, either in Louisville or in the counties immediately surrounding Louisville. So do we have some people who are experiencing homelessness, and you will see interviewed who say they came from Detroit or somewhere else? Yes. If you went to Detroit, I think you could find people who say they came from Louisville. Yes. We move around in this country. But I'll just say one example. I did the homeless street count. I don't know if anybody's done that, but if you haven't, I really would encourage you to do that. It's a point-in-time count. It's done every year. January this year, it happened to be done on the homeless day of the year. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, teams were sent out to go and count, find people who are homeless. I was at the, say this now, over there. I was at the CSX camp this year, and we talked to a whole number of people. And finally said, well, we ought to look at this other section. I don't think there's anybody there, but we ought to look underneath the vine. We found a tent. And we began to talk to these people. And we asked, it was a couple, and we asked, do you happen to be a veteran? And he said, yes. That made everybody happy because there are more resources for veterans. We had the VA with us there. We started yelling, it's a veteran. This man, I talked to this man, and he had become homeless within the last few weeks after losing his house. He didn't move from some other community. He was here in town, and he and his partner were in a tent underneath a viaduct. So, I think the idea, and I think you'll hear this a lot, I know I hear it a lot from the community, that because we provide so many services, we attract people experiencing homelessness. I think that's really a myth in the community.
Although I will say I've lived in probably 6 different cities, and every one of them said that. I think it's just, what people do. Yes.
I know there's no simple recommendation, but generally do you recommend citizens not giving money to people on the street? Or do you recommend giving people money on the street?
I think it's a very personal thing, and people, like, I know people who, for religious reasons, or faith reasons, that is part of their faith, and they feel it's important to follow their faith. I have a lot of family with addiction issues, and I every night hope that no one gives my stepsister money, because I know what she will do with it. And so I tend to, and not everyone feels comfortable doing this, I tend to keep the street tips booklets in my car. When I'm having a good day, I might have a couple of McDonald's gift cards in my car, or some other snacks or something. And so I tend to tell people, I don't feel comfortable giving you money, but I have these resources. I can tell you where to go to get food and shelter. And I feel comfortable doing that because I know those resources, and I know how to help someone. I usually find that most people at that point either they're newly homeless and they're really interested in take it, or they're not because they're
Do the little boxes on telephone poles downtown generate any money at all?
It's a very small amount. I think we are now, I'm trying to remember how many years they've been there, but I think they're about to achieve $10,000, and that's over, 6 or 7 years that they've been there. A lot of people just don't see them, but I think they're more to get people to think about what you do with your money, and there are places to contribute your money. So maybe they're not putting the money in the box, but they're thinking, hey, I could donate to a local homeless agency instead of...
Just an observation, and you might want to comment on it. Apart from metro budget resources, I have seen on television that social service providers in the community are going to have fewer funds this coming year.
Yes, so the budget we plan on, hopefully will pass. When I say hopefully, I don't like this budget. I mean, anybody who stands up and says they love this budget's got something wrong with it. All of the external agencies that we fund, which do great work in the community, are going to get 28% less money than they would have gotten last year. That's the cut that's across the board in the Metro budget. And, it's no secret that Metro United Way has also said that there will be cuts in Metro United Way funding to many of these same agencies. So, it is very tough times for people who are doing this work. Yes, and I think back over here too.
Oh, no, I usually carry around in my glove compartment, like granola bars or something, and I just hand it, because I was uncomfortable giving them.
There is a group that meets at the Yellow parking lot on Wednesday evenings, except waterfront Wednesday evenings, and there are lines of homeless people, and there are people there with food, with soap and towels, with clothing, with shoes, toilet paper, and the homeless or very poor people, some of them I know are not homeless, will come through and say, no, I don't need soap today, but I do need batteries. And I do, or some people bring sleeping bags and tents, and so if you want any more information, the umbrella organization that I got in through, it was called the Forgotten Louisville, TFL, and so if anybody wants any information, let me know.
So there are, and that's a great one, I've been there, that's also my
There are
district.
places, there are church groups that come and bring a hot meal
Right.
every week. And that happens several places in town. There's one on Broadway, under the viaduct, and there's several kinds of groups, and I don't think it's that hard to get connected with them.
We are very fortunate to have in this community a number of groups like that provide services and outreach in the many camps that we have across the city.
And I do think that's unique. I think when I talk to people in other cities that do this, I don't hear the number of these volunteer outreach groups that are doing professional work with the homeless. When I first took this job, I thought, those are not my people. I have members who are the professional agencies who do this work. And then at some point I realized they are filling this huge need in our community that we are not able to meet with the assistance that we have in place right now. And so if people are interested, we have now started coordinating all of those different groups on a quarterly meeting on a Saturday for lunch. They're called Good News Parties. If you want to get on the email list to get those notices about those quarterly meetings, please just let me know. We meet usually in a church somewhere around the city, and all of them come together to kind of support each other. And now we have, through the Mayor's Task Force, a monthly meeting of all of those groups, as well as the professional agency outreach teams. And those groups work together to identify who they're most worried about on the street. So in addition to who's been out there the longest, we're looking for who's most vulnerable, and so they will list somebody that they know their mental illness is so extreme that they are not sleeping in their tent in the winter because they're afraid to be inside. Or that they really feel like they're being sexually exploited on the street. We need to get them, off as quickly as possible. And so these folks that do this just out of the goodness of their heart, they get something out of it too. But they are filling such a huge need in our community, and there's somebody almost every night. So if you want to get engaged and you have Friday nights or you have Tuesday nights, there's an opportunity.
And as I said at the beginning, this is not something that Metro government can solve. So we need philanthropy from everyone, individuals, corporations, churches, and there are ways that all of them, including churches, can get involved in that sort of thing.
Does JCPS have means to help take care of the thousands of kids homeless in our schools?
I can't remember they have a different definition of homeless because the school also includes kids that are doubled up with grandma or somebody else, because that's what is going to affect your education, which is their focus. So they count over 6,000 children who are in the school system who meet their definition of homeless every year. They have one homeless coordinator, and I think she has 2 interns that help her. And she's fantastic, Giselle Danger. She does great things, but she is trying to serve a lot of kids with very few resources. And so we try to work together as the school year starts. She works with all the shelters to make sure the kids have whatever supplies they need, and that the biggest thing she does is make sure kids, because there's a federal law, get to go back to their home school if that's possible. And so she fights with the school transportation people to make sure they come pick them up and get them to their school. And so we do have that. It's a lot of work for those few people.
One more back here, I think.
I don't know if any of you heard on public radio the interview of the principal. I think it was Detroit, and he had like 40% of his kids in the school were homeless, and he opened his school on the weekends for kids to come in and wash their clothes, dry their clothes, take showers. He provided food, and it is open every weekend. And he said one of the problems, and also they can come after school to take showers. And he said one of the problems was that kids were getting bullied because they weren't bathing, because they had no place to bathe. And so there were maybe basic needs. And, we've got schools that are, right now, could, provide those kinds of services. Of course, he's doing it out of the goodness of his heart, and he's not being paid, and there's no staff. And I guess teachers and are volunteering, but anyway, it just was really hard.
The report that I recommended talks about the difficulty in laundry for many people experiencing homelessness there. That's why a program downtown that I talked about, the women's shelter, is very important. They do something like that, I think, but that's a big need throughout the community.
Yeah, and we do have, there are a couple of laundromats right downtown who, there's a 1 day a week that they offer free cleaning for homeless people. We do have, it's a huge problem for families in the summer who are low income and their kids are, eating at school every day during the school year, but in the summer they don't have the resources for that. Dare to Care has been under much tighter financial strains the last couple of years since Young has kind of moved into an international company and is not funding at the same level here in Louisville. And so they have struggled with finding enough money to make sure those kids and families have things during the summer, but they have a special program just for that.
I am happy to say, if the budget that the committee approved is passed, there is the only nonprofit that has gotten extraordinary funding is Dare to Care at $200,000, in part to bridge them from this issue that they've had with the diminishment of funding. I do think there's a general consensus of the council that feeding people is very important. Yes?
It seems to me that largely when people talk about homelessness, what they really mean is what you guys consider the chronically homeless. And that's, according to you all, only 10% of our homeless population. So do you all have a plan in place to kind of amplify that other 90%? Because I feel like if that message gets communicated, we'll kind of start out of that pathway from NB to NB.
Yeah, we have found that we have we're able to make more change by focusing on a single subpopulation. So we have focused on the chronically homeless because they cost the community so much and trying to, and they're the most likely to die on the streets, so that we can lower those numbers. But we've also worked on veterans and on young adults. Our next focus is to be families, which is a really large group, and it's larger than we realize because a lot of those folks don't come in or can't come in right now because we don't have the resources for them. But that is what we need to do. We also, I think we all have a knee-jerk reaction to other, who are those other people, and we've had housing projects for senior citizens that were being built in this community that people have stood up and said horrible, terrible things because you just have this knee-jerk reaction about who are those other people that are going to come in here. And we're going, like you said, we're going to have to change how we think about the people. We're going to get a lot older as a community. The number of homeless people who are seniors is going to triple across the country in the next few years. And so we're going to have more people who are disabled, more people who are older, and we're going to have to be more accepting and be okay with building housing for those people.
I think it's a really good point. I agree with Natalie. I mean, much of the NIMBYism is just when you use the word affordable, frankly. So there's a perception of what you're going to get and what the housing project's going to look like. And it's wrong. I mean, that's not what we're building today. The other thing I'd say about that, I think let's take my personal view. And there's actually a study, housing needs assessment, which supports this view that's recently been in the last few months. The real need, the biggest need, is at the lowest income in the community. So people who are making 30% of the area median income. It is extremely expensive to build that kind of housing compared to housing for people who are at 50% of the area median income. As you move down that scale, the subsidy that you have to provide goes up. So we can build a unit for people at 50% or 80%, all of whom are low-income people. I mean, we're not building for people who are high income. They're all, by definition, if you're at 80% of area median income, you're low income. 50 is lower, and 30 is lower. But the biggest need is at that low, real low level. It is really, you have to continue to put lots of money in those kind of projects because they're just more expensive to do.
Meaning that the rent subsidies, the monthly rent subsidies are higher?
Well, meaning that the subsidies that you're providing, so what the trust fund basically does is provide subsidies to developers, nonprofit developers in some case, or for-profit developers, and say, if you will build this apartment and guarantee that for 20 years, it's going to be rented to people who are at 50%, 30%, 80%, pick your level. I mean, that's how the trust fund operates, how trust funds across the country operate. But if you say, I want you to build this and it's going to have to be for people at 30%, you know, you're putting in a whole lot more money into that project at the beginning.
Yeah.
Which means you're creating fewer units. And we know we have, you know, tens of thousands of units that we need across the community. If you're funding at the lowest level, you're creating fewer new units. But I think we do know that that's where the biggest need is in the community. So it's, I mean, these are very hard decisions. But I do think it's important that we try to move as Natalie is on the trust fund board, I used to be on it. I think it's important that we try as best we can to reach that 30% level.
And, you know, the reality is a huge portion of those people who need that housing are single moms with kids. And when I was growing up in the 70s, or right before the 70s, we used to talk about that our country needed to wrap around families, and we worried about these single moms and children and how we were going to take care of them. That was the way we talked about it in our country. That changed in the 80s and since, and we started talking about welfare moms, welfare cheats, people who were, you know, taking from the system and stealing from us all. And we have kind of created this image of these moms with kids as the, you know, some kind of evil other, when I think there are a lot of people who are moms with kids in this room at some point in their life. And they're just trying to figure out how to survive with their families, and we've got to get back to helping them.
The other reason it's important to think about, why are we talking about this as a city government? Why is it so important that this be funded locally? And the answer is because it's no longer being funded by the federal government. You know, again, all this data is in the report I recommended. The level of funding of housing from the federal level just continues to decline. It's pretty dramatic in the way it's declined. And so that means that cities across the country are saying we've got to step up ourselves. We are doing, I am pleased that we've invested $45 million. What did Nashville propose us? You know, it's $100 million. I mean, there are just massive investments in other communities in affordable housing. And as your city develops and booms, affordable housing becomes even more because, as Natalie said, in her remarks, people become priced out of the housing market. That's what we don't want to see accelerate in our community.
Last questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That was one of our more enlightening conversations. And their presentation, maybe more than some of the ones we've had before, really point to the reality that we can't understand or solve these issues looking at them in isolation. And that is part of why we attempted to put together a wide variety of presenters on topics that are all sort of interrelated. And hopefully you'll get to continue to attend. By the end of the summer, you'll have a broader picture of the issues facing our community. I want to point out that next week is one of our own. Martin Hall is a member here and Belfer, and is on faculty at the Kent School. And his area of specialized research is addiction and the opioid crisis. So hopefully you'll be